He had survived 2 years of grief, 3 years of raising a daughter alone, and 4 years of quietly dreading the elevator that might one day trap him inside with his own CEO. Nathan Cross was good at surviving. What he was not good at was walking into a restaurant on a Thursday night, heart already halfway out the door, and finding Madeline Brooks, the most intimidating woman in his professional universe, sitting at the table his blind date had reserved. She looked up. He stopped breathing. The candle between them flickered like it couldn't decide whether to stay lit either. Neither of them moved. Neither of them ran. That was the first mistake. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's get into it. Nathan Cross had a system for mornings, and the system was non-negotiable. 6:15, alarm. 6:17, he was already in the kitchen because the 2-minute snooze was a lie he told himself but never actually took. 6:30, Lily's door. He'd knock twice, never once, never 3 times, always twice, and say the same thing every single day. 5 minutes, bug. Pancakes or cereal? The answer was almost always pancakes, which meant he'd been making pancakes at 6:30 in the morning for the better part of 3 years, and he had gotten genuinely good at them. Not restaurant good. Not Instagram good. Just reliably, consistently, this is what love looks like good. 7:10, backpack check. 7:20, out the door. It was the kind of routine that looked small from the outside, the kind of thing people didn't notice unless they understood what it had cost him to build it. Nathan understood. He'd built it out of wreckage, piece by piece, in the months after Claire died, when Lily was barely 4 years old and he was 30, and absolutely certain he was going to ruin his daughter's life simply by being the only parent left standing. He'd built it because Lily needed predictability when everything else had shattered. He'd kept it because somewhere along the way, the routine had started keeping him too. By the time he hit the metro platform at 7:40, coffee in hand, he had already made a decision about the day. Nothing unusual, nothing complicated. Head down, do the work, get home by 6. He was not someone who invited chaos. Chaos had come for him anyway, uninvited, when he was 30 years old and standing in a hospital corridor being told that the woman he loved had died from a blood clot that nobody saw coming. Chaos didn't knock. He knew that better than most. So Nathan Cross kept his system, kept his head down, and kept a very deliberate, very calculated distance from anything that might unravel what he had carefully reassembled. Callaway Analytics occupied the 23rd through 27th floors of a glass tower on West Walker Drive, and on any given Monday morning it hummed with the particular brand of manufactured urgency that defined Chicago's mid-sized tech sector. The company had tripled in revenue over 4 years. It had acquired 2 smaller firms in 18 months. It had been profiled in 3 separate business publications in the past year alone, and every single one of those profiles had centered on the same person. Madeline Brooks, CEO. 30 years old. Nathan had read one of those articles exactly once, on a lunch break, and then put his phone face down on the desk and eaten the rest of his sandwich in silence. The article had called her relentlessly precise, which was the kind of compliment that didn't feel entirely like one. It had also mentioned, in a way that seemed designed to sound neutral but wasn't, that she had defied conventional expectations of what a tech CEO looked like. He'd found that line irritating in a way he couldn't quite articulate, and he'd thought about it longer than he should have. What he knew from actual experience was this. Madeline Brooks walked through the office like she had already calculated every possible outcome of the next 6 hours and found most of them wanting. She spoke in meetings with a precision that left no room for uncertainty. She remembered numbers. She remembered names. She remembered apparently a presentation error Nathan had made 8 months ago in a third-quarter review meeting because she had referenced it in passing during a department-wide strategy session 3 weeks later. Not cruelly, not pointedly, just as a data point. And he had felt the blood leave his face in real time. He was not afraid of her exactly. He was aware of her the way you were aware of a fault line running beneath a city you'd chosen to live in. It didn't mean anything was going to happen. It just meant you didn't forget it was there. You look like someone ran over your lunch, said Derek. Derek Okafor occupied the desk diagonal to Nathan's and had, over the past 2 years, become the closest thing Nathan had to a work friend, without either of them making a formal declaration of it. He brought Nathan coffee sometimes. Nathan had once spent 45 minutes helping Derek debug a forecasting model at 9 o'clock on a Friday night. Neither of them had acknowledged the friendship directly. It worked better that way. "I'm fine," Nathan said, dropping his bag under his desk and pulling up his monitor. "You've been fine every day for 2 years. That's not a personality, man. That's a coping mechanism." "Thank you for that." "I'm serious. When's the last time you did something that wasn't work or Lily?" Nathan thought about it. Actually thought about it, which was already a bad sign. "I went to a trivia night in February. That was 4 months ago, and you went alone. I came in third." "Nathan." "What do you want from me, Derek?" Derek leaned back in his chair, and Nathan recognized the expression, the one that meant something was coming that he wasn't going to like. "My wife's friend. She's been asking about you." "No." "You haven't heard anything yet." "I don't need to." "She's a pediatric occupational therapist. She volunteers at an animal shelter on weekends. She has a sense of humor and she's not looking for anything serious. Derek, one dinner. That's all I'm saying. One dinner, no pressure, and if it's terrible, you can tell me it was terrible and I'll never bring it up again." Nathan stared at his screen. The quarterly projection spreadsheet he'd been building for 3 days sat open, rows of numbers waiting for him, orderly and predictable, and asking nothing of him except his attention. "One dinner," he said finally. Derek tried not to look too pleased about it. He mostly failed. Quotes. The week moved the way weeks moved when you had a 7-year-old and a demanding job and a commute that chewed 40 minutes off each end of your day. Monday to Friday, in a blur of school pickups handled by his neighbor, Mrs. Adeyemi, evening routines, bedtime negotiations, and the particular exhaustion that came not from doing too much, but from being the only person responsible for making sure everything got done. Thursday arrived faster than he wanted it to. He changed after work in the office bathroom, which was humiliating in a low-grade way he'd accepted as part of the evening's terms. He'd brought a navy button-down in a dry cleaning bag, which he hung on the stall door and shook out twice before putting on, and he stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a moment longer than he meant to. He looked tired. He usually looked tired. There was a line between his eyebrows that hadn't been there at 28, and he had the kind of face that showed stress the way older wood showed weather. Not dramatically, just honestly. "It's one dinner," he told himself. "You've survived worse than one dinner." He had. He knew he had. That didn't make the drive to the restaurant feel any shorter. The restaurant was called Ancora. It was the kind of place that wasn't trying too hard. Warm lighting, moderate noise level, wine list that was serious without being intimidating. Derek's wife had made the reservation and chosen the location, which meant somebody had put actual thought into it, which Nathan appreciated even as it made the whole thing feel slightly more real than he was ready for. He arrived at 7:52, 8 minutes early, which was typical. He gave his name to the host, was led to a corner table set for 2, and sat down with his back to the room the way he always preferred, facing the entrance. He ordered water, looked at the menu without seeing it, checked his phone. A text from Mrs. Adeyemi confirming Lily was in bed. A work email he deliberately did not open. Nothing from Derek. At 7:59, the restaurant door opened. Nathan looked up because that was what you did. Because your body did that before your brain could weigh in and decide whether looking was a good idea. He saw her immediately. Not because she was loud or dramatic or because she made any kind of entrance designed to be noticed. He saw her because he had spent 8 months training himself to register her presence from across large rooms, the way you trained yourself to recognize a specific sound in a crowded space, not out of interest, out of self-preservation. Madeline Brooks stood at the host stand, scanning the room. For approximately 3 full seconds, Nathan's brain offered him nothing useful, just static. Just the visual fact of her standing there in a dark green dress, hair down instead of pulled back the way it always was at work, looking nothing like his CEO and exactly like his CEO simultaneously. She found his table. Their eyes met. He watched the moment she understood. It moved across her face in a sequence. Recognition, confusion, recalculation. And then her expression went carefully neutral in a way that he recognized from approximately 40 conference rooms. Neither of them moved. The host was already gesturing toward his table. "Walk away," some part of Nathan's brain suggested, weakly, at the exact moment Madeline Brooks made her decision and began crossing the restaurant toward him. She sat down across from him with the controlled composure of someone who had walked into unexpected situations before and had decided long ago not to let them win. "Nathan Cross," she said. Not a question. "Ms. Brooks." The title came out before he could stop it, reflexive as breathing. Something moved through her expression, too fast to name. "We're in a restaurant," she said. "I think you can call me Madeline." "Right." He picked up his water glass, put it down without drinking. "This is unexpected," she said. "I was going to say something less diplomatic." That almost got a reaction. Not quite a smile. Something adjacent to one. "Do you want to leave?" she asked, and the question was direct in the way she was always direct. No performance around it, just the actual question. He thought about it honestly. "I don't know," he said. "Do you?" She looked at him for a moment. Really looked, in a way that was different from the way she looked at people in meetings, which was assessing in a purely professional sense. This was something else. "I drove 40 minutes to get here," she said, "and I skipped dinner. I made my neighbor put my daughter to bed." "Then I suppose we're both committed." The waiter appeared. They ordered wine they hadn't discussed and food they barely glanced at. And for the first 10 minutes, the conversation moved carefully, the way conversations moved when two people were both intelligent enough to know exactly how many ways the situation could go sideways. He asked how she'd been connected to the blind date setup. She explained that her college roommate, who had married Derek's college roommate, which made the world feel very small, had been gently applying pressure for months. "She means well," Madeline said, in a tone that suggested she found people who meant well mildly exhausting. "Derek means well, too," Nathan said. "He also has no concept of appropriate professional boundaries, apparently." "To be fair to Derek," she said, "I doubt he knew." "He definitely didn't know. He would have—" Nathan stopped. "Warned you?" There was a dry edge to it that wasn't quite humor but was in the neighborhood. "I was going to say he would have been significantly more nervous about telling me." She looked at him steadily. "Is this something you need warning for?" He held her gaze. "I wasn't sure what to call it, honestly. What?" The wine helped. Not in a blurring way, neither of them drank enough for that, but in the way that something warm and familiar could lower the ambient temperature of a difficult situation by a few degrees. Madeline asked about Lily first, which surprised him. Not a polite opening question. An actual question, the way you asked when you actually wanted to know. How old? What's she like? Is she with someone tonight? He found himself talking about his daughter the way he rarely let himself talk about her, outside the specific context of parent-teacher conferences or doctor's appointments. Not as a logistical fact of his life, but as a person. Lily, who was obsessed with marine biology at age 7 and had already informed Nathan that she intended to study sharks. Lily, who had recently decided she was too old for goodnight songs, but still left her door open a crack so the hallway light came in. Lily, who looked exactly like her mother, and who Nathan sometimes caught himself staring at for too long, searching for something he couldn't name. He hadn't meant to say all of that. He said it anyway. Madeline listened in a way that felt complete, not waiting for her turn to speak, not constructing her response while he was still talking, just listening. "She sounds like someone who already knows what she wants," she said. "She gets that from her mother." It was the first time he'd mentioned Claire directly, and he felt the slight shift it created in the air, the careful pause that people always gave it, trying to figure out what register to respond in. "What was she like?" Madeline asked. Not "I'm sorry for your loss," not "that must have been so hard." Just the question. He took a breath. Stubborn, hilarious. She argued with waiters about wine pairings. He looked at the table. She would have been an incredible mother. She was great at everything she decided to care about. "How long?" 3 years in October. "And you've been alone with Lily since?" "Since she was 4. Madeline was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's a long time to carry something that size." He looked up at her. The words were simple, but they landed differently than the usual condolences, like she was describing something real rather than offering something ceremonial. "Yeah," he said. It is. She didn't offer him her own grief as a trade. That was the thing he noticed. Some people did that, met your loss with their own, a kind of emotional exchange meant to create symmetry. Madeline didn't. She sat with his for a moment, and then the conversation moved forward, which was its own kind of respect. What she did offer, eventually and carefully and somewhat reluctantly, was honesty about the specific quality of being alone that comes with a particular kind of success. The company has 4,300 employees, she said. I'm responsible for all of them. Their jobs, their health coverage, their retirement accounts, whether they can afford their mortgages. She turned her wine glass slowly. I have a very competent leadership team, a board I respect, and approximately one friend I can call after 10 o'clock at night who won't analyze the call in the morning. That's one more than it sounds like it might be, Nathan said. She lives in Portland. Time zones are complicated. He understood what she was actually describing. Not loneliness as self-pity, but loneliness as a structural outcome. The thing that happened when your position required you to be something specific to everyone around you, all the time, with no room for anything in between. Does it ever stop feeling like a performance? He asked. The being CEO, being what that requires. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. Tonight's the first time in 8 months I've sat across from someone who works for me and not felt like every sentence I said was going to get misinterpreted. He thought about the third quarter meeting. I thought you hated me, he said. What? 8 months ago, the Q3 presentation. I made an error in the revenue projection slide. I transposed 2 figures and the chart was wrong. You caught it in front of the whole department. I catch errors, that's the job. You remembered it 3 weeks later. She studied him. I remember errors because patterns matter. I also remember that you corrected it within 20 minutes, sent a revised version to every department head, and flagged 2 other potential discrepancies in your own analysis that nobody had caught before you pointed them out. She paused. I didn't think you were incompetent. I thought you were thorough, after you thought you'd been careless. Nathan stared at her. Most people would have just hoped nobody else noticed, she said. He was quiet for a long moment. I spent 8 months thinking you had me on some kind of watch list. I had you on a list of people I'd been planning to approach about the senior analyst position that opens up in Q3. He didn't say anything. I didn't know Derek was setting you up with me on blind dates, she added. I want to be clear about that. He exhaled. That's a lot to process. I imagine so. Yeah. They stayed for 2.5 hours. Not because they ran out of things to say. They ran out of topics and circled back and found new ones. They talked about the city, about the particular absurdity of Chicago winters, about the difference between data that told a true story and data that was technically accurate but designed to mislead, which was a distinction that mattered enormously in their respective work, and which they discovered they had very similar instincts about. She was funny, not in a performing way, in the specific, quick, slightly dry way of someone who thought fast and didn't bother softening observations that were accurate. He said something about the company's Q2 customer retention numbers being optimistic, and she said, without missing a beat, that the word he was looking for was aspirational, which made him laugh out loud for the first time in longer than he could remember. She didn't perform being relaxed. That was the thing he kept noticing. She was actually relaxed, in increments, the way a building lost heat slowly at the end of a cold day. Not all at once, but genuinely, in a way that couldn't be faked. By 9:30, she'd taken off the professional armor he associated with her so completely that he found himself having to consciously reconnect the woman across from him with the CEO who occupied the 27th floor. They were the same person. He understood that. But they were also, somehow, not identical. And the distance between those 2 versions of her was where the whole evening lived. The walk to their respective cars was brief, sidewalk lit, slightly awkward in the way that evenings ending could be awkward when nobody was entirely sure what register to close in. I don't know what the protocol is for this, Nathan said honestly. They were standing at the corner of Wacker and Franklin, the city loud around them. There isn't one, Madeline said. That's the honest answer. Do we pretend it didn't happen? She looked at him directly. "I don't know how to pretend," she said. "I've tried. I'm bad at it." He believed her. "Monday morning," she said. "I'm your CEO. That's real, and it doesn't change, and I need you to understand that's not something I'd compromise under any circumstances." "I know." "But tonight wasn't nothing," she said. "So I'm not going to tell you it was." He stood there for a moment, the city noise filling the silence between them, and felt something he didn't entirely have words for. Not attraction, exactly. Or not only that, something more like recognition, the specific disorienting feeling of seeing someone clearly and being seen back. "Tonight wasn't nothing," he agreed. She nodded once, the kind of nod that meant something had been acknowledged and filed and would not be dismissed. Then she said goodnight, and they went their separate ways, and Nathan drove home through the bright orange light of the Chicago evening, thinking about a woman who remembered his mistake and his recovery simultaneously, and wondering what that said about her, and what it said about him that it had taken him 8 months to find out. Mrs. Adiemi was asleep in the armchair when he came in, the television on low, and he woke her gently and walked her to the door and said goodnight. He stood in Lily's doorway for a minute. The hallway light cut across the carpet in a narrow stripe, exactly the way his daughter needed it. She was a small shape under a comforter covered in ocean creatures, one arm flung out to the side, breathing slow and even. He thought about Madeline Brooks saying, "That's a long time to carry something that size." He thought about the fact that it was true, and the fact that it was the first time in a long time that someone had named it plainly, without ceremony. He went to bed. He didn't sleep for a while. Friday morning, he made pancakes. Lily came down with her hair still tangled and sat at the counter and told him, at length, about the dream she'd had involving a whale who wanted to become a teacher, and he listened and made the appropriate sounds of interest. And when she climbed down from the stool and grabbed her backpack, she said, "You look different today, Daddy," with the uncanny observational confidence of a 7-year-old who had not yet learned to be subtle. "I'm the same," he said. She gave him a look that suggested she did not entirely believe him. He dropped her at school and got on the metro and rode into the city with his coffee getting cold in his hand, watching the suburbs become skyline. And he made himself the promise he always made. Head down, do the work, keep the system. He made the promise. He just wasn't entirely sure for the first time in 3 years that the system was going to be enough. The weekend passed. The way weekends passed when you were trying not to think about something, badly, and with significant assistance from ordinary tasks that couldn't quite fill the space they were asked to fill. Nathan reorganized the kitchen pantry on Saturday morning, which was something he did approximately once a year and only when his brain needed somewhere to put itself. Lily sat on the counter watching him rearrange soup cans and asked twice why he was moving things that were already in fine positions, and he said he was optimizing the system. And she said the system seemed fine before, and he said sometimes you didn't know a system needed work until you looked at it directly. And she stared at him for a long moment with her mother's eyes and said, "Daddy, you're being weird," and went back to her book. He coached her soccer practice Saturday afternoon. He made grocery store run. He fixed the bathroom cabinet hinge that had been loose for 3 weeks and watched 2 innings of a Cubs game he couldn't focus on and put Lily to bed at 8:30 and sat on the couch after with a glass of water he didn't drink, staring at a wall that had nothing on it. He kept thinking about the corner of Wacker and Franklin, about the particular way Madeline had said tonight wasn't nothing, not as an invitation, not as a promise, but as a plain fact she was unwilling to file as something it wasn't. He thought about what that required of him. He didn't come up with an answer. Sunday he spent at the park with Lily and let her talk to him about sharks for 45 minutes without interrupting, which was the kind of parenting that felt like love and looked from the outside like a man sitting on a bench trying very hard not to think. Monday arrived the way Mondays did, without asking. The elevator on the 23rd floor opened at 8:47, and Nathan stepped into the Callaway Analytics office and felt the familiar hum of the place settle around him. Coffee smell, keyboard noise, someone's phone conversation bleeding out of a glass-walled conference room. He said good morning to 2 people in the hallway and meant it approximately 40% sincerely, which was about average, and he sat down and pulled up his monitor and told himself, clearly and deliberately, head down, do the work. She's your CEO. That's the whole story. Derek appeared with 2 coffees at 9:03. "How'd it go?" he said, and there was something carefully casual about the delivery that meant he already knew it hadn't been ordinary. Nathan accepted the coffee. Your wife didn't tell you? She said you stayed 2.5 hours and left separately, and that's all she knows because apparently her friend is private. Derek sat down, which means either it was a disaster or it was the opposite of a disaster, and now you're in a complicated situation. I don't know what it was, Nathan said. That sounds like the opposite of a disaster. Derek, was she nice? Nathan stopped, turned back to his screen. Don't ask me that. Derek was quiet for a moment. Do I know her? Nathan picked up his coffee and said nothing. Derek's expression moved through several stages of calculation before arriving somewhere between delighted and alarmed. Nathan, don't. Is it someone in the... I need you to drop it. It's... Derek, I'm asking you directly. Drop it. Derek looked at him for a long moment, and something in Nathan's face must have communicated the precise weight of the situation, because he picked up his own coffee and turned back to his desk and said, very quietly, Okay. Nathan exhaled. But I'm here, Derek said. If you need to talk. I know. He didn't say anything else. He opened his spreadsheet. He did the work. At 11:15, Madeline walked through the main floor on her way to the finance division meeting, the way she did every other Monday. She moved through the space the way she always did, quickly, with purpose, the kind of walk that made people step slightly out of the way without meaning to. She had her tablet and her coffee, and she was already mid-sentence with Priya from operations before she cleared the elevator bank. She passed his desk at approximately 4 feet of distance. She didn't look at him, neither did he. And that was the whole interaction, which amounted to nothing and somehow took up the rest of his morning. He sat through a department budget review in the afternoon and contributed 2 observations and 1 correction that the room acknowledged and moved on from. And he was professional and focused and exactly what the situation required. And when the meeting broke, he went back to his desk and found a calendar invite from Madeline's assistant for a senior analyst performance review scheduled for Thursday afternoon. It was a standard review. She held them quarterly. He was due for one. There was absolutely nothing unusual about it. He stared at it for 40 seconds longer than necessary, and then accepted it and closed the notification and went to get a glass of water from the break room, where he stood at the window for a moment, looking out at the Chicago skyline, going gray in the afternoon overcast, and thinking about how thoroughly he had apparently lost the ability to assess simple things as simple. The rest of Monday was uneventful. Tuesday had its own problems. But the rumor, as far as Nathan could reconstruct later, started in the small gap between what actually happened and what people decided had probably happened, which was where all rumors lived. What actually happened was this. On Tuesday afternoon, he rode the elevator from the lobby to the 25th floor, and Madeline stepped in on the 23rd. There were 3 other people in the elevator, a woman from legal named Patricia, 2 men from product development whose names Nathan hadn't learned. The elevator was slightly too small for 5 people to stand comfortably without acknowledging each other. Madeline said, "Nathan?" Just that. His name. A greeting. The way you greeted a colleague in an elevator. Her voice was normal, professional. He said, "Ms. Brooks." Also normal. Also professional. She looked at her tablet. He looked at the floor numbers. Patricia from legal looked at her phone. The elevator arrived at 25 and Nathan got off, and that was the entire incident. What people decided had probably happened was apparently substantially more interesting, because by Wednesday afternoon, Derek was giving Nathan a look across the office that contained significantly more information than a look should be able to carry. And when Nathan raised his eyebrows in question, Derek very deliberately looked toward the small cluster of desks near the south window, where Jenna Park and 2 others from the marketing analytics team were having a conversation that ended slightly too quickly. Nathan got it. He sat very still for a moment. Then he turned back to his screen. "Don't," he said to Derek quietly. "I didn't say anything." "Whatever you were about to say, don't." Derek said nothing, which was, unfortunately, not the same as nothing being said by other people. He didn't know exactly what was circulating. He had enough experience with office environments to understand that it didn't matter. Once a story had a shape, the specific content was almost secondary. People filled in gaps with whatever made the shape more satisfying, And the shape here was obvious. Single employee, powerful boss, elevator acknowledgement, 2.5 hours at a restaurant. The shape practically wrote itself. He thought about Lily. He thought about her school tuition and the mortgage on the apartment and the dental appointment he'd scheduled for her next month. He thought about the senior analyst position Madeline had mentioned, the one she'd apparently been planning to discuss with him before any of this, and how it would look if that conversation happened now. He thought about what it felt like to have worked for 4 years with his head down and his record clean and his reputation built entirely on the quality of his work. He thought about none of this being Madeline's fault. He thought about none of this being his fault either. He thought about how completely irrelevant fault was when a story was already in motion. He got through Wednesday by not thinking about any of it, which was a technique he had considerable experience with. Thursday's performance review was at 3 o'clock. He arrived at 2:58. Madeline's assistant, a composed man named Garrett, who had the specific energy of someone who had witnessed enough to stop being surprised by anything, showed him into the corner office and told him Madeline would be right in. He sat in one of the 2 chairs across from the desk and looked at the view. Lake Michigan from 27 floors, pewter-colored in the March overcast, and organized himself. She came in at 3:02, carrying a folder and her coffee, and she sat behind her desk and opened the folder, and that was the geometry of the conversation established. Desk between them, professional context fully intact, titles restored to their rightful positions. "Before we get into the numbers," she said, "I want to ask you something directly, and I'd like a direct answer." "All right," he said. "Are you comfortable with the current situation?" He looked at her steadily. Define current situation. Thursday night. Whether it affects your work, whether it creates a problem for you. He thought about the elevator, about Jenna Park's conversation ending abruptly. "I'm professional," he said. "You don't have to worry about that." "That's not what I asked," he paused. "I'm fine." "You're doing the thing where you answer a different question than the one I asked." He almost smiled. Almost. "I'm aware that people are talking," he said. "I don't know what they're saying. I'm aware it's a problem, and I'm aware that the most straightforward solution is to make sure there's nothing to talk about." "There isn't anything to talk about." "There was one dinner. A dinner that both of us attended because of a mutual coincidence arranged by people who didn't know what they were doing." Her voice was even. "My personal life is my own. I don't owe this company explanations for how I spend a Thursday evening." "That's easy to say from where you're sitting." It came out sharper than he meant it to. He saw her register it. "You're right," she said, after a beat. "It is easier from where I'm sitting. I own 41% of this company. My position isn't at risk regardless of what anyone says." She paused. "Yours is a different calculation. My position is fine as long as I keep doing my job." "Yes?" She looked at him. "That's true. I want to make sure you believe it. Do I have reason not to?" "No," she said, "but I'm asking you to believe that without asking you to take my word for it, which I recognize is a difficult position to put you in, and I'm sorry for that." He sat with that for a moment. The apology surprised him, not because she seemed incapable of them, but because she'd offered it cleanly, without hedging it into something smaller. "Okay," he said. "Okay? I believe you." She nodded once. Then she opened the folder. "Your Q1 numbers." The review took 40 minutes. She moved through his performance data with the same precision she brought to everything, and she was direct about 2 areas where his output had been strong and one where the turnaround time on client-facing reports had been slower than ideal, and she asked him what he thought was causing it rather than telling him what she thought, which was a management style he respected more than he'd expected to. He told her honestly. He'd been trying to get ahead of a data integrity issue in the legacy system that wasn't technically his responsibility, but that he'd seen coming for 2 quarters and didn't want to hit the department without warning. She was quiet for a moment. "Why didn't you flag it through the department head?" "I did. In January. He said it was on the roadmap." "When?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." She wrote something in the folder. "Send me your documentation. It's detailed." "Good." He sent it to her from his phone before he reached the elevator. He didn't know why he trusted her with it so quickly. He told himself it was because she was his CEO and it was relevant, which was true, and which was also not the complete answers. Well, the week ended, another began. The dynamic in the office was something Nathan could feel without being able to precisely locate. A slight change in the social temperature, the way a room changed when someone opened a window. Not dramatic, not targeted, just present. Two people in the break room who became slightly more careful when he walked in. A joke Derek made about ambition that he immediately walked back. A silence in a hallway that lasted 3 seconds too long. He dealt with it by being invisible in the ways that counted, which meant he was exactly on time for everything, exactly professional in every interaction. And he said nothing that gave anyone new material, and he made no visible mistakes for 11 business days, which required a level of sustained precision that was exhausting in a way he couldn't explain to anyone. He didn't tell Lily anything. Lily didn't need that weight. She had second grade in a shark research project and Saturday soccer, and those things were enough. They were what mattered. He kept reminding himself of that. One evening, somewhere in the middle of all this, he was giving her a bath. She still needed help washing the back of her hair, which she found undignified but tolerated. And she said out of nowhere, "Daddy, do you ever get lonely?" He kept his voice even. "Sometimes." "Is that why you went on the date that one time?" "Who told you about that?" "Mrs. Adiemi said you had a dinner." He made a mental note about Mrs. Adiemi's conversational range. "I did." "Was it good?" He thought about that with the specific, unguarded honesty of someone speaking to a 7-year-old at bath time. "Yeah," he said. "It was good." "Will you go again?" "I don't know, Bug." She accepted this the way she accepted most of his uncertain answers, with the easy practicality of someone who had grown up understanding that adults didn't always know the next step. She let him rinse her hair. She asked if sharks got lonely, which led to a 10-minute conversation about whether solitary predators had emotional inner lives, and by the time he got her into bed, he had nearly forgotten his own life for almost an hour. Nearly. Well, 12 days after the Thursday review, Madeline passed his desk on the way to a leadership meeting and slowed for a half step. Barely noticeable, nothing anyone watching would have characterized as intentional, and said without looking up from her tablet, "The legacy data issue. I had IT run an audit. You were right." She kept walking. He sat there with his coffee halfway to his mouth. She hadn't announced it, hadn't made it a moment, just said it plainly, the way you stated a fact, and moved on. He found that it meant considerably more to him than an elaborate acknowledgement would have. He put his coffee down, opened his documentation, cross-referenced it against the IT audit he now had access to, because apparently Madeline had flagged his name on the project, and spent the next 3 hours building a remediation model that nobody had asked him to build, but that was going to be necessary. And when he sent it to the department head with a CC to Madeline's office, he felt, for the first time in several weeks, like the ground was solidly beneath his feet. Derek leaned across his desk at 5:30. "You look like someone who just remembered they're good at their job." "I've always known I'm good at my job." "You've always known it. You stopped acting like it about 2 weeks ago." Nathan looked at him. Derek shrugged, not unkindly. "The thing that's in the air right now," Nathan said carefully. "The conversation people are having." "What about it? Is it bad?" Derek considered this with unusual seriousness for a moment. "I think most people are just curious," he said. "Gossip is gossip. It fades. The people who matter around here are watching what you do, not what people are saying." He paused. "And what you're doing is good work. That should be enough." "It usually is," Derek said. "Eventually." He packed up at 5:53. Rode the elevator down with 2 people from the legal floor he'd never spoken to. Walked to the metro in the cold April air with his collar turned up and his hands in his pockets, and thought about eventually. What it required, what it cost, whether he had the patience for it. He thought about what Madeline had said on a Thursday night in March. Tonight wasn't nothing. He thought about how those 3 words had changed the exact nothing he'd been trying to preserve, and how he couldn't entirely bring himself to regret it, and how that itself was a kind of problem. He got on the train. He watched Chicago's skyline shrink behind him as the train moved north and west into the suburbs. The lights going on in the early evening, and he thought about a woman who had apologized cleanly and moved on, who had found his data error and his recovery and weighted them equally, who had said his name in an elevator the way you said the name of someone you knew. Not the way you greeted a subordinate, the way you greeted someone you'd had dinner with and hadn't stopped thinking about. The train went on. The city disappeared. He rode the rest of the way home in the dark. The remediation model Nathan sent on a Thursday afternoon became, without any fanfare, the thing that changed the next 6 weeks. IT integrated his framework into the legacy system audit within 4 days. The department head, a careful, politically minded man named Robert Hess, who had spent 18 months not acknowledging the problem existed, suddenly began referencing Nathan's documentation in meetings as though he had always taken it seriously, which was the kind of institutional amnesia that Nathan had enough experience to recognize and not bother fighting. He let Hess have the credit. The work was what mattered. What mattered more was that 3 people from the data infrastructure team started appearing at his desk with follow-up questions, treating him as a resource rather than a colleague, which was a different kind of weight than the one he'd been carrying. It was lighter. He hadn't realized how much of the past month had felt like walking slightly uphill until the grade changed. Derek noticed. "The tide turned," he said on a Friday morning, not looking up from his screen. "I don't know what you're talking about," Nathan said. "Sure you don't." The office gossip had not disappeared. It never disappeared. It just changed shape. What had been a story about a possible impropriety quietly became, in the way these things shifted, a story about a talented analyst who had identified a significant infrastructure vulnerability and handled it without making it political. People who had been carefully casual around him for weeks became normally casual, which was an improvement he would take. None of this touched the actual problem, which was that he still thought about Madeline in the 7 minutes between putting Lily to bed and falling asleep. He had not found a solution for that particular situation. April moved into May. Chicago thawed in increments, the way it always did. 2 warm days followed by a cold front, followed by a week of rain. The city negotiating with spring rather than welcoming it. Nathan walked to the metro with his jacket unzipped for the first time in months, and felt something in his chest loosen slightly, which he attributed to the weather and not to anything else. He and Madeline had not spoken outside of professional context since the performance review. This was correct and appropriate and exactly as it should be. And he had accepted it and was fine with it. And he thought about it more than he should have, which he recognized as a problem he was not successfully solving. The professional interactions were clean, precise. She ran a tight ship, and he was one of the people on it. And she treated him exactly as she treated anyone else who did good work. With clear, specific acknowledgement when it was warranted and clear, specific correction when it was needed, and nothing additional either direction. That was the right way. He knew it was the right way. He also knew, with the specific, involuntary certainty of someone who had been honest with himself long enough to stop flinching at what that honesty revealed, that the right way and the complete picture were not the same thing. He just wasn't sure what to do with the complete picture. He had Lily to think about. He had a career he had built from genuine work and couldn't afford to compromise. He had a life structured around stability, which was not a small thing, not when you'd watched instability take everything you weren't prepared to lose. So he held it, the complete picture, unresolved, in a corner of himself he'd gotten used to not examining directly. Until the night in May when he couldn't sleep and sat at the kitchen table at 1 a.m. with his laptop and a glass of water, and the apartment quiet around him, and he stared at the cursor on his screen for a long time, and he thought clearly, for the first time without the noise of other considerations, about what he was actually afraid of. Not her authority, not the professional risk, not what people would say. He was afraid of being wrong about her, of having read an evening over dinner and 2.5 hours of conversation and the particular way she said his name in an elevator as something they weren't. He was 32 years old, and he had been wrong about the permanence of things before, in the most catastrophic possible way, and the reflex that had developed in the aftermath of Claire's death was not a reflex of grief exactly. It was a reflex of control. If he didn't extend himself, he couldn't be wrong. If he didn't hope, the world couldn't revise the hope downward. He sat at his kitchen table at 1 a.m. and understood, with the kind of clarity that came from exhaustion and silence and enough months of carefully not looking directly at something, that he had been treating Madeline Brooks as a professional risk when what she actually represented was a personal one. That the professional situation was complicated, yes. That the workplace dynamic required enormous care, yes. But that none of that was the actual reason he had been retreating. He had been retreating because she had seen him clearly, mistake and recovery and all. And he was not accustomed to being seen clearly, and it terrified him more than her title ever had. He closed the laptop, drank the water, went to bed, didn't sleep for another hour. Madeline Brooks had her own version of one in the morning. Hers happened at her desk on the 27th floor on a Wednesday evening in the second week of May, after everyone else had gone home and the office had settled into the particular quiet of a building that contained one person instead of 400. She had a board presentation in 11 days, Q2 projections, 3 acquisition targets for discussion, a new product roadmap that her VP of product had been building for 7 months, and that she was not entirely confident the board was prepared to receive without resistance. She had the slides open on her screen, and the slides were good. She knew they were good, and she was not looking at them. She was thinking about a conversation she'd had that afternoon with her general counsel, a woman named Patricia Vance, who had been with the company since its second year and who Madeline trusted more than almost anyone. The conversation had started as a routine legal update and ended somewhere she hadn't expected. "I want to ask you something," Patricia had said at the end, "and I want you to understand I'm asking as your counsel, not as just ask it." The Nathan Cross situation. Madeline had looked at her. "There is no Nathan Cross situation." "I'm aware that's how you see it. I'm describing how other people in this building see it. Other people in this building are welcome to focus on their work." "Madeline," Patricia's voice was gentle in a way that meant she was about to say something Madeline didn't want to hear. "You remember the Ellison case, 2 years ago. That was completely different. I know it was, but perception is its own reality in these environments, and you have a board meeting in less than 2 weeks, and Richard Carver has been looking for a governance issue to raise since January." She had paused. "I'm not telling you there's anything wrong. I'm telling you that appearances matter when you're a public-facing CEO, and I need to know you're thinking about this clearly." Madeline had said she was thinking about it clearly. She had believed herself. Now, at her desk at 8:30 at night, she was less sure. The honest answer, the answer she would have given in the kind of clear-eyed audit she regularly applied to every other aspect of her professional life, was that she thought about Nathan Cross more than was professionally appropriate, and had been doing so for weeks, and that this was not simply the residue of an unexpected evening. It was something she didn't entirely have a name for yet, which was itself unusual. She generally had names for things. What she knew was this: she had been in rooms with confident, accomplished, attractive men her entire career, and she had navigated those rooms with complete clarity. She had been underestimated in those rooms, and she had been assessed in those rooms in ways that had nothing to do with her competence and everything to do with what she looked like. And she had developed, over years, a very good radar for the difference between someone who saw her and someone who saw an approximation of her that they'd assembled from available data. Nathan Cross, in a restaurant in March, had looked at her like she was a person, not a CEO, not a plus-size woman who had achieved something unexpected, not a symbol or a surprise or an exception. A person with specific ideas and specific humor and a specific past, and he had been interested in the specifics rather than the category, and she understood this now, sitting alone in her office, still thinking about it 2 months later because she had not experienced it that way, in long enough that she'd partially stopped expecting to. She closed the board presentation. She sat for a moment with the uncomfortable precision of a woman who prided herself on not lying to herself. Then she picked up her phone, opened her contacts, and looked at a number she had not used since before any of this started. Her college roommate Sophie's number, the connection that had set the whole thing in motion. She didn't call it. She just looked at it. She put the phone down, picked up her bag, left the office. The 27th floor was silent around her as she waited for the elevator. The city spread out below the window at the end of the corridor, lit and alive and entirely indifferent to the specific internal situation of one person standing alone in a building at night. She pressed the button. Waited. The door opened. She rode down alone. The company had a quarterly all-hands meeting on the third Friday of each month. The whole company gathered in the large event space on the 23rd floor. Madeline at the front, updates and announcements, and the particular performance of shared corporate identity that Nathan had always found slightly exhausting but participated in fully because that was what you did. He was standing near the back with Derek and two people from data infrastructure when she took the floor, and he had the specific experience of watching someone he knew in a professional context and knowing them differently, which was its own kind of discomfort. She presented numbers with the command he'd always associated with her. She was direct and dry, and occasionally funny in a way the room responded to. She was good at it, genuinely, not performatively good at the particular job of leading a room of several hundred people and making them feel like a coherent unit. He was watching her the way he'd watched her at dinner. Not the CEO, but the person being the CEO. And he was doing it without entirely realizing it until she looked up from her notes during a pause, and her gaze moved through the back of the room and found him for approximately 1 second before moving on. 1 second. Less. The kind of eye contact that could mean nothing at all. He looked at his phone. Derek, without looking at him, said very quietly, "Are you okay?" "Fine," Nathan said. Derek said nothing, which, Nathan reflected, was Derek's most effective contribution to any situation. The conversation happened on a Tuesday evening that neither of them had planned. Nathan had stayed late to finish a client projection that was due Wednesday morning. Not dramatically late, just past 6, the floor thinning out around him until he was one of a handful of people still at their desks. He was wrapping up, saving files, getting his jacket, when he heard the elevator open behind him and registered footsteps that he recognized without looking up. She was carrying her coat and her bag and clearly on her way out, and she stopped when she saw him. "You're still here," she said. "Finishing up." He straightened. "You?" "Board prep." She looked tired in a way he'd never seen in her. Not poorly, just genuinely tired, the kind that came from weeks of accumulated pressure rather than one bad night. "How's the legacy system rollout?" "Mostly clean. 2 outstanding data mapping issues, but they're manageable." "Good." They stood there in the nearly empty office. The city glowed beyond the windows, orange and silver in the evening. The floor had the specific quality of a space that had been full of people for 10 hours and was now almost empty. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She looked at him. "All right." "Patricia Vance. She came to see you last week." Something shifted slightly in her expression. Not surprise, more like acknowledgement. "How do you know that?" "I saw her go in, and I know what Patricia Vance's expression looks like when she's delivering news she doesn't want to deliver, because she gave me that same look when she told me 3 years ago that my employee health claim for Lily had been miscoded and needed to be resubmitted." He held her gaze. "I'm guessing she talked to you about me." Madeline didn't look away. She raised a concern, professionally. "About perception." "Yes." "And you're—" "What?" "Being careful." "I'm always careful," she said. "That's not new. That's not what I asked." She looked at him for a moment, that same direct look from a restaurant in March, the one that didn't perform around the question. "Nathan?" "I've been running," he said. She went quiet. "Not from the professional complexity. I know what I told myself, but that's not what it's been about." He was careful with the words, deliberate, because he was not someone who said things he hadn't meant to say. "I've been using the professional situation as cover for the fact that I don't know how to be seen by someone and not immediately look for the exit." The office was very quiet. Somewhere down the floor a phone rang twice and stopped. "That's honest," she said. "You told me you don't know how to pretend. I was figuring that out about myself." She looked at him for a long moment. There was something in her face that wasn't the CEO and wasn't the composed professional and wasn't the careful person watching her back on a political landscape. It was just her, in a nearly empty office at 6:15 on a Tuesday. "I told Patricia there was nothing to address," she said. "I told her my personal life was my own and my professional conduct was above reproach. and that both of those things could be true simultaneously. Are they? Yes? A pause. The professional part is non-negotiable. I need you to understand that's not going to change regardless of anything else. I know it's not. That means there are limits to what this can look like, and how it moves, and there are real constraints here. I'm not going to pretend they don't exist. I know that too. Then what are you saying? He thought about the kitchen table at 1 a.m, about Lily asking if he got lonely, about Madeline in a green dress looking up from a restaurant table with her professional armor entirely absent and no apparent plan to put it back on. I'm saying I stopped running, he said. I'm not sure what comes after that, but I wanted to be honest about where I was. She looked at him with the specific expression of someone deciding how much of themselves to put in a room. He knew that expression. He'd worn it himself, at a corner table in March, trying to figure out how much of the dinner was real and how much of himself he could afford. I need to think, she said finally. It was not a dismissal. It was precisely what it said. I know, he said. I'm not asking for anything tonight. She nodded slowly. Then she put on her coat and picked up her bag, and she looked at him once more, briefly but completely, in that way she had of looking at things she intended to deal with honestly. Good night, Nathan, she said. Good night. She walked to the elevator. He watched the doors close. He stood in the near-empty office for a moment. The city outside was bright and busy and entirely indifferent. His heart was doing something irregular that he decided not to analyze. He picked up his jacket, turned off his monitor, and took the stairs instead of the elevator because he needed the extra 90 seconds. 3 flights down, he stopped on a landing and leaned against the wall and breathed. He had said the true thing, out loud, to the specific person it was about, in real time. He had not calculated the outcome first. He had not run the risk-benefit analysis or modeled the downside scenarios or built himself a safe exit. He had just been honest. It felt terrifying and specific and entirely different from the retreat he had been perfecting for months. It felt, he thought, like the first non-system thing he'd done in 3 years. He pushed off the wall and finished the stairs and walked out into the Chicago evening. And the air was warm for May, genuinely warm, and he walked the 6 blocks to the metro with his jacket over his arm, and his heart still doing that irregular thing. And he thought about the look on her face when she'd said, I need to think. Not closed, not finished, just real. He could work with real. He had a train to catch. He had Lily to get home to. He had a 7-year-old who would be waiting up past her bedtime with something to tell him about sharks, because she always was, and that was the actual shape of his life, the morning pancakes and the soccer practice and the bedtime negotiations. And he did not want to give any of that up. He didn't want to give up the part that was also still learning to ask for what it needed. He got on the train. He watched the city disappear behind him. He thought about a woman who had stood in a nearly empty office and not pretended. He thought that was worth something. He thought it might be worth quite a lot. She thought for 4 days. Nathan knew this because he counted, not obsessively, or not only obsessively, but in the way you tracked something when the outcome mattered and you had no control over it and the waiting was its own specific kind of work. He went to the office. He did his job. He made pancakes. He coached Saturday soccer in a light rain while Lily argued with the referee, a 12-year-old boy who was volunteering and clearly regretting it, about whether the ball had crossed the line, and Nathan stood on the sideline thinking that his daughter had inherited Claire's absolute refusal to let a wrong call go unchallenged, and he felt the usual complicated mixture of grief and pride and love that Lily reliably produced in him, and he did not check his phone. He didn't hear from Madeline on Wednesday. He didn't hear from her on Thursday. Friday passed, Saturday. Sunday evening, he was reading to Lily. She had insisted on a book about deep-sea creatures that was technically above her reading level, but that she followed with aggressive determination, and his phone buzzed on the coffee table. He picked it up after a deliberate pause that he hoped communicated to no one in particular that he was a calm and reasonable adult. It was a text. 1 line. Can we talk? Not at the office. He looked at it for a moment. Lily turned a page and announced that the anglerfish's bioluminescent lure was, in her scientific assessment, really cool actually. And he said yes, it really was. And he texted back, when works for you. Her reply came in under 2 minutes. Saturday morning. There's a coffee place on Dearborn called Meridian, 9 o'clock if that works. He typed back, I'll be there. He put the phone down. Lily looked at him with the sideways attention of someone who had learned early to read adult energy without making it obvious she was doing so. Who was that? Work thing, he said, which was not entirely a lie and not entirely the truth, and which his daughter accepted with the easy practicality she applied to most of his incomplete answers. He turned the page to the anglerfish's hunting strategy. He read until she fell asleep with the book still open on her chest, and he sat there in the quiet of her room for a minute longer than necessary, listening to her breathe before he got up and turned off the light and went to figure out what Saturday was going to cost him. Meridian Coffee was the kind of place that existed in Chicago neighborhoods the way good coffee shops always existed. Slightly off the main street, slightly hard to find the first time, with exposed brick and decent acoustics, and enough ambient noise to have a private conversation without it feeling like you were performing one. Nathan arrived at 8:56, which was typical, and found a corner table near the window, and ordered a black coffee, and looked at the street outside for 4 minutes. Madeline arrived at 9:02. She was in a gray sweater and dark jeans, hair pulled back the way she wore it at work, and she scanned the room quickly before she found him. He noticed she did that, always cataloged a space when she entered it, which was the habit of someone who had spent years in rooms where the dynamics required monitoring. She ordered a coffee at the counter and brought it to the table herself and sat down. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Of course." She wrapped both hands around her cup. He'd learned, over months of watching her in professional settings, that this was what she did when she was thinking carefully. Her hands needed something to hold on to while the rest of her stayed composed. "I've been trying to figure out how to say this in a way that's completely honest without being reckless," she said. "I don't think those two things are as compatible as I'd like them to be." "Say it anyway," he said. "I'd rather have honest." She looked at him directly. "I've been thinking about you since March," she said. "Not the way you think about a colleague, not the way you think about a problem you need to manage. I've been thinking about you the way you think about something real that you're trying to decide if you're allowed to have." He held her gaze. "And what did you decide?" "I decided that the question of what I'm allowed to have is the wrong question." She set her cup down. "I spent the last 4 days auditing every argument I've been making to myself about why this is too complicated, and I realized that most of those arguments were legitimate concerns dressed up as reasons, but a few of them were just fear wearing a business suit." "Which ones were the fear?" "The one that says, I don't know how to be with someone and also be who I am professionally. The one that says people won't be able to separate the two, and I'll always wonder if the relationship changes how people see my leadership." She was precise about it, careful, the way she was precise and careful about things she'd actually examined rather than things she was improvising. "And the one that says, I'm not the kind of woman someone like you ends up with." That last one landed harder than the others. He watched her say it without looking away from him, which he understood cost her something. "Someone like me," he repeated quietly. "Successful, stable, good at his job, clearly capable of real love." She said it plainly, without self-pity, which made it more difficult to receive. "I've been told in various ways over a long time that what I look like makes me a less obvious candidate for that kind of story." "Who told you that?" "Not in words, usually, in the way people were surprised, in the way certain rooms worked, in the particular expressions of certain men when they discovered I was the CEO and not someone else." She picked up her cup again. "I'm not looking for you to argue with it. I'm telling you it's a noise that runs underneath things, and I wanted to name it so you understood what I was actually deciding when I decided to be here." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Outside, a taxi moved through the Saturday morning street. A couple walked past the window with a dog. "I want to say something," he said, "and I need you to hear it as true and not as something I'm saying to make you feel better, because I have no interest in managing your feelings." She looked at him steadily. "All right. When I sat across from you in March, I wasn't thinking about your title or your company or what it meant that you were a CEO. I was thinking that you were the most precise and direct and genuinely funny person I'd talked to in a very long time, and that you listened like someone who actually wanted to know what I was saying." He kept his voice even. "The noise you're describing, whatever other people put in the room, that's not something I contributed to. I need you to know that." She was very still for a moment, not the professional stillness, something more personal. I know, she said. That's part of why this is hard. He didn't fully understand that, and his face said so. If you were someone who saw me the way I've been seen before, she said, this wouldn't be complicated. I'd know what to do with it. I know how to handle a situation where the power dynamic is the actual thing at play. She looked at her coffee. You're harder because you're actually real. He sat with that for a moment. Then, so where does that leave us? It leaves us here, she said. Talking honestly, which I think is the only place worth starting. She looked up. I'm not asking you to navigate this carelessly. I'm not going to let my personal life create professional exposure for either of us. I mean that, and it's not a disclaimer, it's a genuine commitment, but I also can't keep treating something real like it's a liability to be managed. What does careful look like? Slow, she said. Nothing at the office, nothing that puts you in a position where anyone could argue your career is connected to your relationship with me. I need that line to be clean, and I need it to stay clean, and I need you to tell me if you can't live with those terms. He thought about it honestly, not as a performance of consideration, but actually thought about it. I can live with those terms, he said. I've been protecting Lily for 3 years. I know how to be careful with something that matters. Something in her expression shifted at that. Not a smile exactly. Something quieter. How is she? She told me last night that the anglerfish is, and I'm quoting directly, really cool actually. That's sound scientific judgment. She has good instincts. He looked at Madeline. She asks about my date sometimes. The one I went on in March. What do you tell her? That it was good. He paused. That I don't know what comes next. What do you tell yourself? He looked at her across the small table in the corner of a coffee shop on a Saturday morning, the city going about its ordinary business outside the window, and he said that it's worth finding out. They stayed for an hour and a half. Not because they resolved everything. There was no resolution available that morning, and neither of them was naive enough to pretend a single honest conversation fixed the complexity of their situation. But they talked, and the talking was real. And when they left separately, her north, him south, because they were still being careful, would always be careful in public spaces, he felt something that was different from the retreating feeling, something like forward motion. He had forgotten what that felt like in the specific context of another person. The weeks that followed were not easy, and they were not a montage of romantic progress. They were mostly ordinary weeks, office work, Lily's spring concert, a terrible rainstorm that flooded the parking garage at the metro station, a department meeting where Nathan had to present a revised client acquisition model and did it cleanly and well, and Madeline was in the room and said nothing to him specifically, but caught the department head afterward and said, within Nathan's earshot but directed at Hess, "That's the kind of forward modeling I want to see become standard." He didn't look at her when she said it. Neither did she. But Derek, standing next to Nathan, made a sound that was technically a cough. They had dinner again in late May, a different restaurant, farther from anything connected to Callaway. They drove separately. They sat across from each other and talked about things outside the office. Lily's upcoming school year, Madeline's experience growing up in Indianapolis before she'd come to Chicago for college, a documentary about ocean temperatures that Nathan had made the mistake of mentioning to Lily and that Lily had now watched 4 times. The conversation had the quality of something being built carefully, not thrown up quickly. Each piece placed with some consideration of what would rest on top of it. She was not easy to know exactly. She was private in ways that emerged gradually. She didn't offer things about herself freely, but when she did offer them, they were true, and he had come to understand that was her specific form of trust. She had learned to be careful with what she put in rooms. He recognized the reflex. He'd developed his own version of it. "You grew up with both parents?" he asked at dinner. "My mother left when I was 9, she said, without drama. "My father raised me. He was a high school math teacher. He made everything about logic and pattern recognition, which was probably why I ended up in analytics." A pause. "He died 4 years ago, right around the time I took the CEO position. I'm sorry." He would have found the whole thing both completely predictable and slightly impractical. She picked up her wine. "He had opinions about work-life balance that I failed to inherit. My mother would agree with him. Your mother's seen your schedule?" My mother thinks I need to sleep more and socialize more, and she's not wrong about either. He looked at his glass. She comes from Evanston every other Sunday for dinner with Lily. She thinks I should move closer to her. Do you want to? I want Lily to have more people in her orbit. I want the apartment to be mine because I'm not ready to... He stopped, looked up. I bought it with Claire before she died. I've never wanted to leave it. She nodded, not with condolence, just acknowledgement, the way she gave things their actual weight without making them heavier than they were. That makes sense, she said. It's also possible I've been using it as an excuse not to move forward. He said it plainly, the way he'd been learning to say true things plainly since a Tuesday evening in May. Those can both be true simultaneously, she said. Yeah, they can. They finished dinner. They walked 2 blocks in the same direction before splitting off. Her car was east, his was west, and he stood at the corner for a moment after she left and thought about how she walked with the same directness she brought to everything. No performance, no hesitation, just moving toward where she was going. He drove home with the windows down. June arrived. The board meeting happened. Madeline's Q2 presentation was, by all available accounts, the company-wide update memo, the tone of the leadership team's demeanor the following Monday, Derek's commentary delivered in a single raised eyebrow, a success. The product roadmap was approved. The acquisition targets were greenlit for due diligence. Richard Carver, the board member who had apparently been looking for a governance issue since January, had reportedly found none, and had instead asked 2 questions about market positioning that Madeline had answered without visible irritation, which Patricia Vance later described as an act of considerable professional discipline. Nathan sent her a single text that Monday evening. Heard the board meeting went well. Her reply, the word I'd use is fine. The word other people are using is well. I'm splitting the difference. He smiled at his phone. Lily, doing homework at the kitchen table, looked up. What? Nothing. You're doing the face. What face? The one where something's funny, but you don't want to explain it. He put his phone down. Finish your homework. I am finishing my homework. She pointed at the page in front of her, which appeared to contain 1 completed math problem and 7 blank lines. I'm also observing my environment. Mrs. Adeyemi says that's important. Mrs. Adeyemi is correct. Finish your homework. Lily studied him for a moment with the particular focus of someone gathering evidence, then returned to her math. He got up to start dinner and thought about how he'd never been good at keeping things from Lily, not because she demanded explanations, but because she absorbed information the way her mother had, through pure attention, without making a production of it. He was going to have to figure out how to talk to her. Not now. Not yet. It was too early, the ground still being laid. But eventually. He was going to have to find a way to introduce a new person into a life that Lily had understood as exactly 2 people for 3 years. He wasn't afraid of that conversation. He was afraid of the one that came before it, the one where he told his daughter that someone new mattered to him and watched her face to see what that cost her. He started making pasta and let the fear sit there, acknowledged and unresolved, because that was the honest way to carry it. The promotion came on a Thursday afternoon in the 2nd week of June, delivered by Robert Hess with the particular enthusiasm of a man taking credit for recognizing talent he had been slow to notice. Senior Financial Analyst. The title Nathan had known was coming since March, but which felt different now that it had arrived. Not because of what it meant for his salary, though that mattered with a 7-year-old and a mortgage, but because of the specific history of how he'd gotten there. The legacy system work, the client modeling, the 47 ordinary days of doing the job well when doing the job well was the only thing he could control. He accepted the offer from Hess with appropriate professionalism and gratitude, and he emailed his documentation team about the transition timeline, and he did not go to the 27th floor or send a text or do anything that connected the 2 things in any visible way. He waited until that evening. I heard congratulations are in order, he texted her, because she would know he knew what the message meant. Her reply was prompt. You earned it. That's not a small thing to say, coming from me. I know. You should know it. He read the last line twice. Then he put the phone in his pocket and went to Lily's room where she was sprawled on the floor doing something elaborate with her shark figurines, and he sat down on the floor next to her and said, I got a promotion today. She looked up. What's a promotion? It means I did good work and they gave me a bigger job. Did you know you were going to get it? I hoped. Did you work hard? Yeah, I did. She considered this. Good, she said, with the matter-of-fact confidence of someone who had never doubted it. Then she handed him a small plastic hammerhead shark and said, "You can be this one. He's the second in command." He took the shark. He sat on the floor with his daughter in the early summer evening and thought about what it had taken to get to a Thursday in June that contained a promotion and a text message and a 7-year-old handing him a hammerhead shark with complete confidence in his worth. And he held all of it without trying to make it smaller or more manageable than it was. It had taken everything he'd been afraid to risk. The shark game went on for 20 minutes before Lily decided it was time for dinner, and Nathan got up from the floor and went to the kitchen, and the apartment was warm with the early summer coming through the open window. And nothing about it was perfect. The cabinet hinge was loose again, and there was a bill on the counter he'd been avoiding, and Lily's backpack was in the middle of the hallway where someone was going to trip over it. And it was, in its accumulated ordinary weight, completely his. It was the life he'd built on the far side of the worst thing that had ever happened to him. He was finally, he thought, learning to stop standing at the edge of it and looking back. The summer moved the way Chicago summers moved, generously, then suddenly, with the specific urgency of a season that knew it had a deadline. July came in hot and stayed that way. Nathan's new role filled his days with a different quality of weight. More responsibility, more visibility, more of the specific pressure that came from being someone people looked to rather than someone who could quietly deliver excellent work from the middle of the room. He was in more meetings. He presented more. He had 2 junior analysts reporting to him now, both smart, both requiring different things from him, and he was learning, imperfectly and with some genuine missteps, what it meant to lead people rather than simply outperform them. He made mistakes. In his 3rd week as senior analyst, he approved a client projection model that had an error in the discount rate assumptions. Not catastrophic, caught before delivery, but visible enough that he had to flag it to the department head and own it cleanly, which he did, which was the only way to do it. One of his junior analysts, a 25-year-old named Carmen, who was meticulous and slightly terrified of him, had actually caught the error first, and he had made a point of saying so in front of Robert Hess, which seemed to surprise Carmen, and which Nathan understood was the whole point. You didn't build people by taking their wins. His mother came for Sunday dinners every other week and watched him the way she had always watched him, with the combination of pride and low-grade worry that was her specific frequency of love. In July, she said, over pasta that Lily had technically helped make by stirring things with insufficient patience, "You seem different." Different how? Less like you're managing something and more like you're actually living somewhere. Lily looked up from her pasta. "Daddy got a promotion," she said, as though this explained all observable changes in his demeanor. "I heard," his mother said. She was looking at Nathan in a way that had nothing to do with the promotion. He said, "I've been trying to figure some things out," which was the most he was prepared to offer, and his mother received it with the grace of a woman who had learned, over 32 years of parenting him, when to push and when to let a thing arrive in its own time. She let it arrive. Madeline had developed a habit. Neither of them had named it, and neither of them had explicitly designed it, but it had emerged organically the way things emerged when 2 careful people stopped being quite as careful with each other, of texting him on Tuesday evenings. Not every Tuesday. Maybe 2 out of 3. Something specific, never generic. A data point she'd found interesting. A news story about marine biology that he could pass to Lily. Once a photograph of a restaurant menu that contained an item described as artisanal deconstructed shepherd's pie with no further commentary, which he had found genuinely funny for reasons that required no explanation. He texted back, sometimes immediately, sometimes an hour later when Lily was in bed. The conversations were short, usually. 10 minutes of back and forth about something real, and then good night, and then the specific kind of quiet that followed a conversation with someone you were glad had called. They had dinner once in July, twice in early August. Always separate cars, always away from anything connected to the company, always in the particular register of 2 people building something that didn't have a name yet and were being patient with the naming. He noticed the things that surprised him. She laughed at things she found genuinely funny and did not perform laughter at things she didn't. She had strong opinions about Chicago architecture that she delivered as facts until he pushed back, and then she would reconsider with a precision that suggested she actually cared about getting things right, rather than just about winning. She ate her food without commentary and ordered what she wanted from menus without the particular performance of self-consciousness that he had seen in some women and that had always made him sad because it spoke to an exhausting calculus running constantly underneath the surface. He noticed that she was uncertain in ways she didn't broadcast, that she would occasionally go quiet in the middle of a sentence, not dramatically, just a brief pause, like she was checking her own math before continuing, and that this was her being honest rather than managed. He had learned to wait for those pauses. What came after them was usually the most real thing she'd said all evening. She noticed things about him too. She told him so, once, at dinner in August, that she had figured out his tells, the ones that meant he was okay and the ones that meant he was carrying something. He asked which was which. She listed them with quiet accuracy. The way his left hand went still when he was working through something difficult, the way he deflected with humor when the thing he was actually feeling was too large to name directly, the way he talked about Lily when he wanted to talk about himself but couldn't quite get there. He sat with that for a moment. "You've been paying attention," he said. "I pay attention to things that matter to me," she said, simply. He didn't say anything. She picked up her wine. Outside, the Chicago evening went on. The Lily question arrived in September, not because anything forced it, but because things that had been building for months eventually reached a weight that required acknowledgement. He had been thinking about it all summer. How to do it, what to say, whether Lily was ready, whether he was ready, whether anyone was ever actually ready for the specific conversation where you told your child that your heart had made room for someone new. He had no script for it. He'd never done anything like it before. He tried to engineer the right moment and failed several times. Once she was tired and grumpy and not available for any conversation that required emotional nuance. Once he started and lost his nerve 3 sentences in and pivoted to asking whether she wanted a snack, which she accepted without noticing the pivot, and once he got as far as sitting down next to her on the couch with the specific energy of someone about to say something significant, and she looked at him and said, before he could open his mouth, "Are you going to tell me about the woman?" He stared at her. "What?" "The woman from the date." She said it matter-of-factly, in the tone she used for presenting established information. "You've been different since the date. You smile at your phone. Mrs. Adeyemi said she's probably someone special, but you'd tell me when you were ready." He was going to have a separate conversation with Mrs. Adeyemi. "She said that, did she? She also said she thought it was good for you." Lily had the shark book open on her lap and was looking at him with her mother's eyes, patient and direct and entirely unafraid of the answer. "Is it a woman from work?" "Yes." "Is she nice?" "She is." "Is she nice to you? Like, does she actually care about you, or is she just nice in general?" He thought about a coffee shop in May, and 4 days of thinking, and I've been thinking about you the way you think about something real that you're trying to decide if you're allowed to have. "She actually cares," he said. Lily processed this. "What's her name?" "Madeline." She tried it out. "Madeline." A pause. "Does she know about me?" "She does. I've told her a lot about you." "What did you tell her?" "That you're obsessed with marine biology, and you're a very determined soccer player, and you have excellent scientific instincts, and you're the most important person in my life." Lily looked at her book for a moment. "Is she going to try to be my mom?" He had been waiting for this one, had thought about it specifically, the right words for it. "No," he said carefully. "She's not going to try to be anyone she's not. She's just going to be herself if you decide you want to meet her. And if you don't, that's okay too." "I didn't say I didn't want to meet her. I know. I just wanted to know she wasn't going to try to be my mom." Lily turned a page. "I already have a mom. She's just not here." The sentence hit him the way Lily's direct statements about Claire always hit him, without warning, with total precision, in the specific place that never entirely calloused over. He sat with it for a moment. "That's right," he said quietly. "She's just not here." Lily looked up at him. Something moved in her face, an understanding too old for her age, carried there by 3 years of watching her father figure out how to hold loss and love simultaneously. "Daddy," she said. "Yeah, Bug. It's okay to like someone." He looked at his daughter, 7 years old, sitting on the couch with her shark book and her mother's eyes, giving him permission he hadn't known he was waiting for. He felt the specific burn behind his eyes that he'd learned over 3 years to breathe through without looking away. "I know," he said. "Okay." She went back to her book. "You can tell me more about her later if you want." He sat there for another minute. Then he got up and started making dinner, and the apartment was warm and ordinary around him, and he thought about the fact that his daughter had just shown more grace than most adults he knew, and he didn't examine it too closely because some things were better received than analyzed. He told Madeline about the conversation 2 days later, over the phone. They'd started talking on the phone sometimes, not just texting, when Lily was asleep and the apartment was quiet. He told her what Lily had said, the whole of it, including, "I already have a mom, she's just not here," and there was a silence on the other end that he understood was not absence but attention. "She sounds extraordinary," Madeline said. "She is." He paused. "She said she wants to meet you, when you're both ready." Another pause. He had learned to read Madeline's silences. This one was the kind that meant she was checking her own emotional math before responding, the kind that preceded something real. "I'm not going to pretend that doesn't scare me," she said. "Meeting a 7-year-old? Meeting your 7-year-old. Her voice was even, but there was something underneath it. "Getting it wrong with Lily is the one thing I can't undo. Everything else in my life I can address if I get it wrong. A child is different. You're not going to get it wrong. You don't know that." "No," he said. "But I know you pay attention to things that matter to you, and I know you'd rather be honest and imperfect than smooth and false. That's actually most of what a child needs from an adult." She was quiet for a moment. "You've thought about this." "I've thought about everything." A pause. "She doesn't need another mother. She doesn't need a performance. She needs someone who treats her like a person and shows up consistently. That's a high bar in the sense that it requires actual commitment, but it's not a complicated bar." "Nothing you describe as not complicated is actually simple," she said. "That's fair." "I want to meet her," Madeline said. "I just wanted you to know it means something to me, that I understand what you're trusting me with." He sat in the quiet of his apartment with his phone against his ear, the city a low hum beyond the window, and thought about what it meant to be trusted with something, really trusted, not given an obligation but actually allowed inside someone's life. He had not extended that in 3 years. He had not known until recently how much not extending it had cost him. "October," he said. "Give it a few more weeks. Let Lily get comfortable with the idea." "October," she agreed. October came cold and bright, which was Chicago's best setting. The light sharp and clean, the trees along the street running through gold and amber, the city settling into the season with the specific energy of a place that had decided to be beautiful before the gray arrived. They met at the Lincoln Park Zoo on a Saturday morning. Nathan's idea. Lily's territory. Somewhere she felt confident, somewhere the agenda was clear enough that the social pressure was lower. Lily had agreed to this plan with a gravity that suggested she understood it was a significant occasion and had decided to meet it accordingly. He arrived with Lily at 9:45. Madeline was already there, standing near the entrance in a coat the color of dark plum. And she saw them before they saw her, and she had a moment. Nathan caught it, a brief moment of composed apprehension, her hands still at her sides, before her face settled and she walked toward them. Lily stopped walking. She looked at Madeline with the comprehensive assessment of someone taking a full inventory. Madeline looked down at Lily with an expression Nathan had not seen on her before. Not professional, not carefully managed, just genuinely uncertain and trying anyway. "You're Madeline," Lily said. "I am," Madeline said. "You must be Lily." "I am." A pause. "Daddy said you're good at math." Something crossed Madeline's face that was almost a smile. "I'm decent at math." "He said you're the boss of a big company." "That's also true." "Are you good at it?" Nathan made a small sound that he converted imperfectly into a cough. Madeline glanced at him briefly, a look that said she did not need rescuing, and then looked back at Lily. "I try to be," she said. "Some days are better than others." Lily considered this. Daddy says that about his job too. It's true for most jobs. What about being a mom? Is that a job you try to be good at? She said it directly, the way she said most things, without apparent agenda, but with the uncanny aim of a child asking what they actually wanted to know. The question sat in the air between them. Nathan was very still. Madeline crouched down to Lily's level. And it was not a performance of it, not the slightly theatrical adult engaging with child crouch. It was just practical, so they could be at the same height, so the conversation could happen face to face. "I'm not going to be your mom," she said, clearly and simply. "You already have one. I know that." She paused. "I'm going to be Madeline, who cares about your dad and wants to know you if you'll let me." That's the honest answer. Lily looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," she said. Not "that's great" or "I like you" or any of the warm affirmations adults hoped for. Just okay. The same practical word she used to accept a reasonable arrangement, which Nathan understood was actually about as good as it got with Lily in the opening round. Madeline stood back up. She looked at Nathan. He looked at her. "She said you know about sharks," Madeline said to Lily, and they started walking into the zoo. The morning was not perfect. Lily was 7, which meant she was also unpredictable. She was charming for 40 minutes, and then abruptly irritable about a pretzel she'd wanted from a cart that had run out of the salted kind, and she directed this irritability at the general atmosphere in a way that required Nathan to intervene and Madeline to simply wait it out, which she did, quietly, without making it a moment. Later, Lily warmed back up over the penguin exhibit, where she explained to Madeline, with the confidence of a practicing scientist, that penguins were not technically fish and that most people didn't understand the difference between marine birds and marine mammals, and Madeline listened with genuine interest and asked 2 follow-up questions that were specific and accurate enough that Lily looked at her with upgraded respect. "Do you actually know about animals?" Lily asked. "I know a reasonable amount." "Did you look it up before today?" "A beat. I may have done some reading this week." Lily's expression was complex for a moment, processing the information, weighing its meaning. "That's good," she decided. "That means you were trying." "I was trying," Madeline said. "Daddy tries too," Lily said, as though this confirmed something she had already worked out. "He's not perfect, but he tries a lot." "I know," Madeline said. "That's one of the things I like about him." Lily looked at her father, then at Madeline, then at the penguins. "Okay," she said again, and turned back to the exhibit, and that was the whole of it. A 7-year-old's provisional acceptance, extended honestly and without fanfare, which was the only kind worth having. Nathan stood next to Madeline at the railing with the October light coming through the glass of the penguin enclosure and thought about how this was the specific reality of his life, imperfect and ordinary and occasionally interrupted by pretzel-related grievances, and that Madeline was standing in the middle of it without flinching, and that this meant something he didn't have the right words for yet. He found her hand at the railing, briefly, covered it with his for a moment, and she turned to look at him with an expression that was not the CEO, and not the composed professional, and not the carefully managed person navigating a complicated world. It was just her, genuinely there, genuinely willing. He let go before Lily turned around, but the moment had happened. The weeks that followed built on themselves the way good things built, not in dramatic leaps, but in small, reliable additions. Lily asked about Madeline on a Tuesday, unprompted, wanting to know if she liked soccer. Nathan said he'd find out. Madeline, when asked, said she didn't know much about soccer, but was willing to be educated. Lily received this information as an acceptable project. At the office, nothing changed and everything was different. Madeline remained exactly what she had always been professionally. Precise, demanding, fair, the specific and difficult standard that made everyone around her better or sent them elsewhere. Nathan remained what he had become, a senior analyst who did excellent work and managed his team with the same combination of clarity and genuine investment that he brought to everything. They were professional, Completely, consistently, visibly professional. There was nothing to see because they had built it that way, with care, out of real respect for what they each carried and what the situation required. The gossip had faded by September. By October it was gone, replaced by the simple fact of Nathan's performance record and Madeline's irreproachable conduct, which together produced a reality that made the earlier story not scandalous, but just wrong. People stopped looking for a story when the story they expected failed to materialize. Richard Carver sent Madeline an email in late October commending the Q3 results. She forwarded it to the leadership team with a single line: "This is everyone's work." She did not make exceptions for Nathan in either direction. She did not promote him beyond what his record warranted and did not hold him back from what it did. That was the line she had drawn, and she kept it with a consistency that, over time, became its own argument. Nathan watched her do this and understood it for what it was. Not cold, not impersonal, but the specific form of integrity that protected them both and protected something larger than them both. He had grown up professionally enough to understand that the line was not a limitation on what they were to each other. It was the thing that made everything else possible. November brought the first real cold, and with it a slowness that Nathan had started to welcome rather than dread. He was less afraid of quiet than he had been a year ago. Quiet had started to feel like space rather than absence. Madeline came to the apartment for the first time on a Sunday afternoon in November. Lily's idea, not Nathan's, which he had found significant. She had announced over breakfast that she wanted to show Madeline the shark research project she'd been building since September, which was an ambitious multi-page document with hand-drawn illustrations that she kept in a folder with official marine biology research written on the cover in her best printing. Madeline arrived at 2 o'clock with coffee from Meridian. 3 cups, which meant she'd remembered that Lily liked the hot chocolate there. And Lily met her at the door with the folder already open. Nathan stood in the kitchen doorway and watched his daughter explain her research methodology to his girlfriend. He'd started using the word privately, carefully, 2 weeks earlier, and it had stopped feeling strange. With complete seriousness, and watched Madeline read each page with the same attention she brought to board presentations, asking questions that were genuine and pointing out details she found interesting. And he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. The specific quiet of a Sunday afternoon being exactly what it was. No management required. Nobody performing anything for anybody. Lily's apartment, filled for 3 years by 2 people in their careful routine, held 3 people that afternoon without asking either of the adults to be anything other than themselves. Lily eventually abandoned the research presentation in favor of showing Madeline how to set up her shark figurines in what she called accurate ocean formations, which was an activity that required both of them to be on the floor. And Nathan watched from the couch with his coffee getting cold and did not take a photograph because some things were better held than recorded. At one point, Madeline looked up from the ocean formation and caught him watching, and she raised an eyebrow. The particular one that meant what? And he shook his head, meaning nothing, just this. And she held his gaze for a moment before going back to the sharks, and that entire exchange happened without a word and contained more than most conversations did. By spring, the word had stopped feeling careful. They had told no one at the office directly and announced nothing formally because they had agreed they would not until they were certain the relationship was real enough to withstand being named publicly, and by March it was. Derek knew. Derek had known since October, with the particular radar of someone who had been paying close attention for months, and had said exactly one thing about it, which was, "I'm glad," and then had gone back to his coffee, and Nathan had felt a warmth for Derek that was out of proportion to the statement, but entirely appropriate to the occasion. Patricia Vance knew too, because Madeline had told her in November, professionally and directly, with full disclosure of the timeline and the steps they'd taken to ensure clean separation between the personal and professional. Patricia had been quiet for a moment and then had said, "You've handled it correctly. For the record, I think you've always handled it correctly," which was as close to a blessing as corporate counsel ever offered, and which Madeline had received with the specific restraint of someone who did not need external validation but was grateful for it anyway. The board would know eventually, and there would be a proper disclosure process, and it would be managed the way all difficult things were managed, with documentation and procedure and real care. Madeline was not naive about the complexity. Neither was Nathan. They had both chosen to walk into it anyway. That choice, Nathan understood, was the whole story. Not the blind date, not the awkward elevator, not the months of professional navigation. The choice to walk into complexity with eyes open and not use the complexity as an excuse to stay where it was safer. He had spent 3 years building a life from wreckage. He had done it well. He had made pancakes and coached soccer and held his daughter's hand at difficult moments and done his job with genuine care and woken up every morning to a life that was stable and good and built entirely around making sure one small person was okay. He had done all of that. And then he had learned slowly, through the specific education of actually paying attention to another person, that doing all of that did not require him to stop wanting something for himself. That the version of himself who said, "I'm fine" to every question about how he was actually doing had not been honest, had been managing, which was different. He was not fine in the way he had been fine, carefully, performatively, as a way of making sure nobody asked too many questions. He was fine in the way people were fine when they were actually living somewhere instead of maintaining a position, which was messier, which required more, which was worth considerably more. The spring morning, when it crystallized, came on a Saturday in late March, exactly 1 year and a few days after a Thursday night in a restaurant on Michigan Avenue. Lily had a soccer game at 9. Nathan made pancakes at 6:30, and Lily came down with her hair tangled and her jersey already on, and she ate quickly and talked about the team's defensive strategy with the intensity of someone who had thought about it more than the occasion strictly required, and Nathan listened and offered one tactical observation that she considered and partially accepted. Madeline arrived at 8:45 with 2 coffees and stood in the kitchen doorway in the particular easy way she had developed in this apartment. Not a guest's way, not yet a resident's way, but her own specific way, present and real and not performing anything. And Lily grabbed her soccer bag and said, "You're coming to the game, right?" with the casual expectation of someone for whom this was already established. Madeline looked at Nathan. He looked at her. "I'm coming to the game," Madeline said. They stood on the sideline together in the cold March morning while Lily played midfield with her determined, slightly argumentative soccer style, and Nathan drank his coffee and watched his daughter run and felt the weight of the day in the good way. The way weight felt when it was the right kind, the earned kind, the kind you had because you had something worth carrying. He thought about Claire. He still thought about Claire at soccer games. The specific, familiar grief of knowing she would have loved this, would have been louder on the sideline than he was, would have argued with the referee without Lily's subtlety. He still thought about her at the moments that mattered. He had accepted over 3 years that he probably always would, and that this was not a problem to be solved but a truth to be carried, gently, in a way that honored what it was. He thought Madeline understood this without his having to explain it. She had not once asked him to be over it, or past it, or finished with it. She had, in her specific and careful way, made room for the parts of him that were still in process. That was its own form of love, he thought. Not the kind that asked you to be complete before it would show up, but the kind that showed up in the middle of the incomplete and stayed anyway. Lily scored in the second half, a clean left-foot strike from the edge of the box that went in off the post, and she wheeled around with her arms out in the way she'd been practicing, and her face found Nathan on the sideline immediately, the way it always did, the way it had since she was small enough to be carried, always looking for him first. He raised his fist. She raised hers back. Then she looked at Madeline standing next to him, and she raised her fist at Madeline too. A small gesture, a specific inclusion, extended without drama. Madeline raised her fist. Her expression was the one Nathan had come to know as the thing underneath everything else. Not composed, not managed, just there. He stood between them on a cold March morning and thought about what the year had asked of him. It had asked him to be honest when honesty was expensive. It had asked him to stop using caution as a permanent residence and start using it as what it was actually meant to be. A tool, not a hiding place. It had asked him to look at a woman across a restaurant table and stay when the easier thing was to leave, and to say the true thing in a nearly empty office when the true thing was harder than the managed thing. And to tell his daughter honestly that he was learning to open his life up again, and to stand in the cold at a soccer game and feel the weight of all of it and not wish it away. There was a version of this story, Nathan thought, that people told about luck, about a blind date that happened to go well, about two people who happened to be right for each other, about how things happened to work out. That version was easier to tell. But the real story was not about luck. The real story was about what two people decided to do with something difficult. Madeline had decided to be honest about what she felt instead of managing it into disappearance. He had decided to stop running from the specific fear of being wrong about something real. Lily had decided, with the enormous grace of a child who had lost more than most adults before she was 5 years old, to make room without being asked. None of that was luck. That was choice, made repeatedly, under pressure, imperfectly, with full knowledge of what it cost. That was what it actually looked like, Nathan thought, when people didn't give up on each other. Not grand gestures and perfect moments. A fist raised on a soccer sideline. A cup of hot chocolate remembered. An anglerfish described as really cool, actually. A text on a Tuesday evening. A woman crouching to eye level on a cold day outside a penguin exhibit and telling a 7-year-old the honest thing instead of the easy thing. The game ended. Lily came off the field sweaty and triumphant and slightly muddy, and she went directly to Nathan and then turned to Madeline and said, "Did you see the goal?" With the specific hunger of someone who needed confirmation from multiple sources. "I saw it," Madeline said. "Left foot off the post." Lily looked at her. "Most people don't notice the post part." "I notice things," Madeline said. Lily considered her with the comprehensive gaze she'd been deploying since October, calibrating and recalibrating, and then she said, "Yeah, I know." And she turned and went to find her water bottle and left the two adults standing on the sideline in the March cold, the city going on around them, the morning bright and ordinary and completely theirs. Nathan looked at Madeline. She looked at him. There was nothing particular to say about the moment, which was its own indication that something had arrived. The things that most needed saying were the things that eventually didn't require words. They had started, the three of them, in an unexpected place. A blind date engineered by people who hadn't understood what they were engineering. A title that was supposed to be a wall. A grief that was supposed to be a ceiling. An office building full of people looking for a story. What they had built instead was quieter than a story and more durable. It was a Saturday morning with muddy soccer cleats and cold coffee and a 7-year-old who wanted multiple witnesses to her left-foot goal. It was an apartment where Sundays felt like what Sundays were supposed to feel like. It was two people who had chosen honesty when the easier options were available and had discovered slowly and imperfectly and without guarantees that honesty compounded over time. Not into perfection, into something better than perfection, into something real. Nathan picked up the empty coffee cups and put his arm around his daughter's shoulders as she came back with her water bottle and her muddy cleats and her research folder that she had, for reasons unexplained, brought to the soccer game. And the three of them walked to the parking lot in the clean March air, and it was not the ending of anything. It was just a Saturday morning, which was everything.